All right, good morning, everyone. Kind of got a brisk start to the day, didn't we? And got up and, of course, had coffee going, so I'm checking the weather for the day and everything. And then I went to social media and Facebook particularly, and anyway, preaching friend up in Madison, Wisconsin. He said, for all of you who have called me, yes, we are still having services this morning. And it was -5 with a wind chill of -25. And he said, but I do suggest that you keep your head inside the car. Don't be hanging it out like a dog. And so anyway, I'm thinking, well, they would take 35, even though it might have a wind chill factor of 28 or so, as opposed to what they are having. But then I'm thinking, they choose to live there. You know, nobody's forcing them to stay in Wisconsin, I don't believe. But anyway, then I thought, well, it's maybe like that young lady Susan and I met over the summer. She says, it's worth the winters to not have to deal with the Texas summer. And yeah, and she said, you know, the only way to describe winter we're in Montana, where she was at, is brutal. It's just brutal. But she said summertime, which lasts way longer, is much more conducive to being here. All right, it's good to see everybody. I know we got a few folks this morning that are under the weather, battling seasonal stuff, and so we want to be mindful of them. And we're going to continue our study that we had started last week about what is man and what we as Christians believe about man. And we'll continue to note that. But I'm going to ask if you would to go with me to God in a word of prayer, and then we will turn our attention to our study. Holy God, loving Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your blessings. Father, we're thankful for the day. We're thankful for this first day of the week, to come together and to worship, to help encourage one another, that we might continue to resist the devil, that we might continue to show forth a shining light, that folks might see Christ living in us. We ask you to bless all of those who are in need of our prayers, if it be according to your will. There are those that are physically sick and the spiritually sick. Father, we ask you to help have a change of heart and mind with them, that they might continue to seek you first. We are so blessed to be able to come together and to worship you, the only true and living God. We ask you to be with us as we go through our Bible class and then on into our worship hour this morning, and Lord willing, bring us back again this afternoon or this evening. It's in Christ's name we do pray. Amen. All right, last week we were noticing Psalm 8, and so I'd encourage you to just go back to Psalm 8. And we're not going to really delve in there, but there might be a few comments we make relative to it. So go ahead and put a marker there. And so as we continue to talk about man, then you'll have that marked if I deem it necessary for us to go back there and notice things. But I want to just share this with you, and so maybe you've heard of this, and kind of wish we had more women in here, because they could certainly relate to some of this. But it says there was a nursery rhyme that went around, and it said, "What are little girls made of?" So there we go. And so I shame on me. You men know that well. So anyway, what are little girls made of? Sugar and spice and what? Everything nice. That's what little girls are made of. Well, in 1964, the Reader's Digest, they examined that. Now, don't shoot the messenger this morning. But what are little girls made of? What are women made of? Well, the first thing they said is little girls are made up 4 ounces of sugar in our body. And these are things that they're going to talk about. There is enough chlorine to disinfect 5 swimming pools. There is also 85 pounds of oxygen, 2 ounces of salt, 50 quarts of water, 3 pounds of calcium, 24 pounds of carbon, and let me turn the page here. Enough phosphorus to make 20,000 match heads. Now, enough fat for 10 bars of soap, enough iron to make a 6-penny nail, enough sulfur to rid a dog of fleas, as much glycerin as an explosive, but no spice. No spice whatsoever. Now, it's Reader's Digest and their stuff from 1964 entitled Basic Chemistry. Now, everything we've stated about women to some degree is also present in whom? Men. But as we think about us, and last week we noted that we are made, we were created, we are made in God's image. As we were looking at the fact, Psalm 139:14, I believe Dale brought that up, where I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. But being made in the image of God, what does that mean? Well, since we are made in the image of God, mankind had a glorious beginning. Go to, if you would, very quickly to Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 11. Ecclesiastes 3:11. Here Solomon writes, "He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end." Now you think about this passage, it's talking about God has put eternity in our hearts. The point that he's making here is the fact that we are created in God's image, and so therefore we had a glorious beginning. And every human being, every person, when they are born, eternity is what? Eternity is a reality. Somewhere in one of 2 realms, eternity is going to be experienced by every person. And he's put that in our hearts. But he says, God has placed eternity in your hearts. We're not able to find out everything that God did. We're not able to itemize everything that God did from the beginning to the end. We're not able to know that. There are as many questions that we might have about certain things as the knowledge and the information we have of it. I mean, it raises questions, and yet if the Bible doesn't answer those questions, then we've got to be willing to accept what? We'll never know the answer, but we trust in God. And so we're made in the image of God, and there is eternity that is awaiting everyone, and yet God has a special place for his creation, for those who are continuing and will do the will of God. There is a special place for us, and that's called heaven. And man was made in God's image, and as such, he's different than the animals. And we are not just quantitatively different than the animals, we are qualitatively different. We think about the animals, it's not that we're just bigger and stronger and got more knowledge and all of that than the animals do. But brethren, we are created to rule and to take care and to manage the animal kingdom. And, there are animals, and there's nothing that is absolutely wrong with being an animal lover. To a certain degree, we all are to be an animal lover. And, Susan and I haven't owned a dog in years. We haven't owned a cat in years. But we have cared for many dogs and many cats. I haven't owned chickens in years, but I still get to what? Care for chickens. Why? Kids. But when you think about we as humans, God has given us the authority and the ability to rule over the animal kingdom. That goes back to Genesis and the creation week, and it's certainly that which is seen in other places. And so yet the greatest thing is the fact that we are created in the image of God. And we are those who are the highlight. As I mentioned last week, it wasn't until after day 6 wherein man was made that God said, it's very good. So, now, having said that, we're created in the image of God. But now man is also created with a dual nature. What are the natures that we have? Physical and spiritual. Those are two natures that we have and that we possess. Humans are spiritual as well as physical. John 4:24 tells us that God is what? Spirit. God is spirit. Even so, man in his essence is a spiritual being. Jesus would say in Matthew 4:4 that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. So physical food alone, that is not going to meet man's what? Needs. Now, must we have physical food? Yes, because this body will not operate without it. And yet, we are individuals that are both body and spirit. Now, if you go to Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 7, in Ecclesiastes 12 and 7, once again, the text is going to tell us, then the dust will return to the earth as it was. Now, what is this referencing? What is Solomon looking back on? How was man made? What did God use to make man? The dust. So this physical body that God used to make man, it is eventually going to return where? Back to the dust from which it came. And then the spirit of man, that which God has infused in man, that which he has put in man's heart, that spiritual aspect of man, that is going to return unto God who gave it. But then there's 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 23. When you go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 23, there Paul is talking about the fact that man is a triune being. We are body, soul, and spirit. So what is it that Paul is doing? Is it something where we find a contradiction, or is it something that we just understand Paul is talking about different aspects? We look at 1 Thessalonians 5:23, when it says that man is a spirit. This is talking about the equal and the eternal part of man, which in the Bible is generally referred to as his what? Soul. But in this instance, he's talking about our spirit. And so that's the part wherein we're talking about the eternal nature of man. But then he says we're both spirit, soul. Now what does this mean? Well, apparently, as Paul is using it, it is a way that equals life. Life-giving force. We're alive. We're not what? Dead. And there's passages that when some translations will say, God breathed into man and man became a living soul. So we have life. And so whenever one has passed away, what has happened? The soul has what? Left the body. That energizing force, that spirit that is within us. And so in many places in the Bible, it is not a contradiction. It is just simply terms that are being used and understood. In 1 Thessalonians 5:23, then he talks about the spirit, soul, and the body. And of course, we know what our body is. It is this physical shell that he has given to us. And so while we look at man, and Paul would describe a three-part, it's not always where Paul talks about three parts. But in 1 Thessalonians 5:23, he does. And yet the common way in which the Bible refers to man is body and soul or spirit. So we have a dual nature. And so what does that mean? What's the point here as we're talking about body and soul? Matthew 10 and verse 28, fear not him that can kill the body only. Don't fear them. So who can kill my body? Any one of you. I'm not to fear that though. But fear rather him who can do what? Kill both body and soul in hell. So I'm to have a fear, a respect, an awe of the one who created me, created in God's image. And so I am to have that respect for the God who made me. Now, when we think about who controls who, does the physical body control the spiritual body, or is it vice versa? Vice versa. The inward man is to control the physical man. And Paul talks about this somewhat in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 in verse number 16, when he's talking about though the outward man, the outer man is decaying, yet the inward man is renewed how? Day by day. Now, those of you who are been older longer than me, what is it? Because I've experienced this more in the last, well, really the last 3 months than ever before. But my hands are taking a beating. More than ever before. Brethren, you see my thumbs? This one, stupidity. This one, major stupidity. You might ask, well, how did you do that? Well, this one, I shut in the door of my own truck. I have no clue how I did it. I got out of my pickup, going in the house. I reached and I just shut the door. And there my thumb was in the way. Thank you, Ben. I was looking at myself sort of like ignorant, but anyway, Ben says talented. Now Ben, he's more talented than the rest of us. Yeah, I would say give me 5, Ben, but you don't have 5. on either hand, I don't think. But anyway, the point is, what's happening physically? Oh. But I am proving one thing. You got to be tough to get what? Old. You got to be tough. But this is just part of it. But knowing this, brethren, every morning when I wake up and I look at what I've done to my thumbs and I look at other things, what is that a reminder of? What should that cause me to do? This physical body's not going to be here forever. And that's exactly what he says here in 2 Corinthians 4:16. The outward body decays, and yet the inward man is that which is to be renewed day by day. And then also in 2 Corinthians 5 and verse number 1, moving on from chapter 4, if you go to 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 1, he states with certainty, "For we know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed," some translations will say is dissolved. And it's in continuation of this thought in verse 16 that he brings up. "For we know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, that is eternal in the heavens." And so as we continue to think about this dual nature that we have a soul, and therefore this part that we've never seen of ourselves, this soul, this energizing force, this which God has placed within us, it is that which is going to live forever. And so once I'm born, then I know there's a time period of days on my physical life, and then I'm going to leave this world, and yet I'm not done living. Because in Matthew 17, where Jesus has the disciples and they're up on the mountain, and who comes to him? In a vision they see, Peter sees who coming? Moses and Elijah. And he sees them. And who are they talking to? They're talking to Jesus. And when that conversation finishes, then Peter says, "Lord, it's good for us to have been here. Now we can build tabernacles. One to you, one to Moses, and one to Elijah." So then what do we hear? Who speaks from heaven? God. And God says, "No, this is my beloved Son, whom I'm well pleased." Now what? Hear ye him. Because as they're observing this, and this conversation is taking place between Jesus and Moses and Elijah. And brethren, wouldn't you like to have been there and heard what they were talking about? What is this conversation? What's Moses represent? The law. What about Elijah? Prophets. So therefore, being those representatives of the law and the prophets, then Jesus said everything that's been written in the law and the Psalms and the prophets concerning me has been fulfilled. Luke 24. So now we see where God then puts his stamp of approval on this fact that, yes, the law and the Psalms and the prophets is being done away with and will be following the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. But at this point in time, what he's highlighting for us is, how long had Moses been dead? long time. Moses is roughly 1,500 years before Jesus. So he's been dead for somewhere close, probably 1,400 years. We'll just use that. And so he's been dead 1,400 years physically, but what about his soul? Still alive. And I can't answer this for you, but how'd they know it was Moses? Brethren, I can't tell you what you're going to look like in heaven, but apparently there was characteristics that Moses had that people could look at him even in that spiritual state, and he was what? Recognizable. What about Elijah? Same. We put Elijah, and we know that Elijah was probably, we'll put him as an 8th century prophet. So Elijah's been dead for 800 years. And so now here's Elijah, and he appears. Well, how did they know it was Moses and Elijah? Now, brethren, like I said, I don't know what kind of body you're going to have. Why do I not know that? God doesn't tell me. I do know that the body I'm going to have is going to be so much greater than this body, because my body is going to be comparable, whatever it is, it's going to be comparable to the body that Jesus has, because John tells me in 1 John chapter 3 that when I see him, I will be like he is, for I will see him as he is. So it's going to be comparable to how Jesus is now. But I don't know what it's going to be. But I don't think that there is a sense wherein we lose all recognizableness. People can see me and they'll recognize me somehow, some way. Dale? Yeah.
And I think, I've always thought that we would be at that point. I mean, not that we look like Jesus, but that we would be recognizable.
Right.
In the sense that people did recognize him.
Now, I know that flesh and bone will not what? Inherit the kingdom of heaven. I know that because that's what the Bible tells me. Flesh and bone, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven. And I know that there's going to be some things that will be different. But the reality is, we are going to have bodies that are going to be recognizable, not only ultimately, but then when we think about the parable of Luke 16, Lazarus and the rich man, where were they when that parable is being explained and the rich man wants Lazarus to come over and put water on his tongue so that he might get some relief? Where were they? In that Hadean realm. In that realm where what goes to the Hadean realm? The spirit or the soul of man goes to the Hadean realm. Well, there's a great gulf that's fixed between them. And so how big is that gulf? Well, it's too big to cross, but brethren, it might not be but that wide. What he's talking about is not the expanse. It's not like you're standing on one side of the Grand Canyon and they're on the other side. Because it was close enough that if possible, Lazarus could do what? Come over and put his finger in water and dip it on the rich man's tongue, and he'd get some relief. So this Hadean realm, the gulf is not so much in distance, but the gulf is in what? Destiny. Not so much distance, but in destiny. One is in the Hadean realm where there's nothing but suffering, and the other is in Abraham's bosom, or paradise. As Jesus tells the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. So now as we think about this and we think about what I'm really trying to get us to think about, not wanting to get sidetracked on this Hadean realm stuff, but the rich man could look across and he saw whom? Lazarus. He recognized him. He knew he was over there, and he said, let Lazarus dip his finger in water and come over here and put it on my tongue that I might have relief. Brethren, I preached a sermon on this years and years ago, and I made the statement, if I was going to choose anybody in this room and have them dip their finger in water and bring it over and stick it on my tongue, I would pick Leela Pratt. Why? I'm going to suspect that Lee probably had the biggest hands. So he could bring what? The most water. Because I'm looking for physical relief. I'm looking for something to ease my pain and my suffering. But folks, as we think about this, the point of it is, while we have changed, while we're now looking at this in a somewhat different life, everyone needs to appreciate the fact that we have a soul that is going to live on forever, and to some degree and in some way, we are not going to lose the ability to recognize one another. So now, as we continue to think, man has been created in the image of God. We have a dual nature. And so now what is man's infinite worth as we move on through this study? God made man in Genesis 1:27-31, and after that, day 6, he said it is very good. Psalm 8, going back there now, Psalm 8 says that he crowned man with glory and honor, adding that he made man to rule over the works of the hands of God and to put all things under man's feet. Psalm 8, verses 5-8. Now in Matthew 6 and verse 26, Jesus said that man is worth more than the birds. Does God take care of the birds? That's the point of that context. Does God take care of the birds? Yes. But yet we are of more value than any bird.
What is that value there? What the value that God puts on us? How does he do that? What value are we to God?
Yeah.
Other than bringing somebody else.
Well, and the thing about it is, we are the crowning art of God's creation. And he takes care of the birds. He takes care of the lilies of the field. He takes care of them. I mean, right now we know that the growing season's over, right? But in his care for the plants and everything, what's happening? They're dormant, but then come springtime, all their allergies will be bursting and everything because everything's blooming. That's part of God's care. What about the animals? He cares for them. He takes care of them. Now, we may not understand some of his ways, but he takes care of them. Now, what about man? Well, the context of Matthew 6, the question is, are you not worth more than a bird? And the whole point that he's making is God's going to take care of you. So therefore, do not be worrying about what? Life. And I think that's the best way to put it. Don't be worrying about life. He's particularly mentioned food, clothing, and shelter. But don't be worrying about these things. Don't be worrying about life. What you need to be focused on is found in chapter 6 and verse 33. Seek first the kingdom. And then all these other things, they will be added unto you. And so when we think about us being worth more than the birds, and birds are extremely fascinating, part of God's kingdom and his creation, and God takes care of them. But then we are worth more than the whole world. You remember when Jesus asked the question in Matthew 16 and verse 26, what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? If you gain the whole world and you lose your own soul, then what has it profited you? So there's that point. What's the benefit? How's man profit? How is man going to benefit if he loses his soul, even if he gains the whole world? The reason being is, we as God's creation, more particularly though, we who are a part of the spiritual body, what price was paid for you? We noted this last week as I was talking about oftentimes the value we put on something is what we paid for it. What we paid for it. And so this is valued now. And so sometimes that's the only thing we use to measure the value of things, is what I paid for it. All right, Dale?
Along those lines, I had this thought this morning, I guess, thinking about Christ and the blood that was shed, his blood was shed, thought that we come in contact with his blood through baptism, and that relieves us of our sins and all of that. And the thought being, well, Christ was one man, how much blood did he have? But the thought being, Christ shed all of his blood for me. He shed all of his blood for one. He shed all of it for each and every one of us, not just a portion.
Right.
And I think that's a thought. And then the thought about heaven, the thought about the soul and all. We have a problem of putting heaven a whole lot better than the earth is life on earth. That is just a problem that man has, because he don't want to die. Paul addresses that a while ago. Even though we're out of this tent, hold on, better off.
Yeah.
So what we don't know has got to be a whole lot better than what we do know.
Right. And Paul would even add to this in the book of Philippians when he says, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. Therefore, we think about this idea and thought, we've been redeemed not with silver and gold, but with the precious blood of a lamb, 1 Peter 1, 18 and 19. And I talked a little bit earlier about everything that is found in us, particularly as it was addressed to the nursery rhyme of, girls are sugar and spice and everything nice. But it's also been stated that the human body only contains 98 cents worth of chemical components. So if they ever ask you, what are you worth? Well, 98 cents. Now that's the old thought that was presented, the old statistics, but that may need to be revised because reading again now, scientists have discovered the energy value of chemicals. The DuPont company says that those in an average human body could produce $85 billion worth of energy. This floors me. However, a person is actually worth far more than that. Now think of that, what I just said. The DuPont company says that those in an average human body could produce $85 billion worth of energy. I mean, that's a staggering thought. But we are worth more than that. When we look at Psalm 8 again, the psalmist says in verse 5 that we're made a little lower than God, created a little lower than God. The message is this: even though man is valuable, small, and puny compared to God, man has often proved himself to be unworthy of the honor God has given him. So man's purpose in life is to do what? What is our purpose in life as we think about who created us, why we were created, and all of that? What is our purpose? Okay? To serve God and to honor Him. Isaiah 43:7 and 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 31 are all passages which are going to tell us that we are here to honor, to obey, to worship, and to glorify God. And so then that brings us to Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13. What's the end of the matter? Fear God and keep His commandments. This is the whole and duty of man. Even though the word duty is italicized and added by the translators, it's the whole of man. The whole of man is to fear God and to keep His commandments. And so, when we think about man, we are the crowning art of God's creation. We are worth more than I think oftentimes we give ourselves credit for being, and I think part of that is because of what Paul says, let not a man think more highly of himself than he ought to think in Romans chapter 12. But at the same time, I need to understand I have what? Value. And that is evident by the price that was paid to redeem me. And so we'll move on to another study next week. But anyway, just remember as we bring this thought to a close that you are important to whom? God. All right, thank you. Y'all come on, kiddos.